Coming up on Theater Talk.
He ran on cocaine and adrenaline, and he was just this bundle of energy, always, always. And he became a recluse for 2 years.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
And I'm the show's producer, Susan Haskins.
Allan Carr was a flamboyant, colorful Broadway and Hollywood producer. He was famous, of course, for producing the hit movie Grease. And on Broadway, he did La Cage aux Folles. It all crashed when he did a notorious Oscar ceremony in which Rob Lowe appeared with Snow White, one of the more memorable Oscar moments. He had a fascinating life, and he is the subject of a terrific new book called Party Animals, a Hollywood tale of sex, drugs, and rock and roll by our good friend Robert Hofler, who has been the longtime theater and film correspondent for Variety, and the author of another terrific book about Rock Hudson, or rather the agent who created Rock Hudson's career, and that book was called The Man Who Invented Rock Hudson. Bob Hofler, welcome back to Theater Talk.
Okay. Thanks for having me again.
All right, before we get into Allan Carr's life, you got to tell us about Allan Carr's parties. Now, the parties he threw in Hollywood are notorious to this day. What were they like?
Well, the book essentially starts in 1973, and that's when he bought Hillhaven Lodge, which was owned by Ingrid Bergman. And he was a manager, Anne Margaret, Tony Curtis, Melina McCauley.
Real old school kind of stars that he liked.
Diane Cannon. Well, it was 1973, so Anne Margaret was certainly, very current. And also he had Marvin Hamlish around that time, and that was his triple Oscar win. But he gave these wild parties, and certainly there were other A-list events that Bob Evans gave or Sue Mengers gave, but those were strictly A-list. Allan really mixed it up at his parties, and he was the first one to bring rock and roll stars like Elton John and Rod Stewart into that Hollywood mix of actors. He also had a real respect for old Hollywood, so you would go to these parties and Mae West might be there, or Salvador Dali, or Jack Benny. So they'd be sitting next to Alice Cooper, and sitting next to, the good-looking pool boy.
There were a lot of good-looking pool boys
yes,
around.
that was the essence, the good-looking pool boys.
That was a lot of it, that you would go to Allan's, and there was all the cocaine you wanted, and there was all the, sexual conquest that you wanted, because, unlike other A-list parties, he would have good-looking young men and women at these parties, and this simply had not been done before. He also took a concept, I think, from the 60s, what we remember as happenings, which were kind of theatrical events that took place in odd places like, a school or a vacant lot. And so for the Tommy party, the premiere, of which he did not produce Tommy, that was Robert Stigwood, but Allan was the promoter, he staged the party in the subway at 57th and 6th. So people left the Ziegfeld Theater and walked up a red carpet and down into the subway. And here was Anne Margaret and Elton John and Tina Turner. And people thought this was a goof.
Did he have a discotheque in his house?
Then in 78, around the time that he had Grease, he spent $100,000 to do this Egyptian discotheque in this tiny room. And Brett Ratner, the director, bought the house. And actually, the book starts when Brett Ratner first sees the house, and Brett Ratner is going through the house, and there's all this Allan Carr memorabilia, and there's all this memorabilia of Ingrid Bergman, and he goes down into the basement, and here is this disco still intact, which was legendary, but hadn't been used for at least 15 years because Allan was a recluse the last 10 years of his life. But it was this wild, discotheque. And
you've been to the house that Ratner owns now. Is
oh,
the
yeah,
discotheque
Brett
still?
Ratner gave, oh, yeah, no.
The discotheque still in working order?
Absolutely, and he refurbished it. But Brett Ratner had much better taste than Allan Carr, which didn't take much. And, really returned the house to what it looked like in Ingrid Bergman's day. And of course it was very interesting because Ingrid Bergman lived in the house, and her husband, Dr. Lindstrom, invited Roberto Rossellini to be a guest, and it was in the Stone Cottage, which is still on the grounds where that affair started.
Oh, dear.
So, you know, Allan had these, you would have the parties that the big celebs in the press showed up for. Right. There was also a Rolodex party where A through L, if your name was A through L, you showed up on Friday night, and on Saturday night, you know, the M through Z. And Roman Polanski during the, you know, rape trial showed up, and that made it this scandal because he shouldn't have been at an Allan Carr party while he was on trial for rape. But he also had these private parties, and, you know, it was intriguing to me. This is the kind of stuff that, you know, you can't make up as a novelist, that where this affair started between Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini is where these orgies were when Nureyev came to town, and there would be a line of 25 guys out and out in front of the stone house to service Nureyev.
Wasn't that called the mattress party?
It was called the mattress party because you were supposed to bring a mattress, because Allan also liked to watch young guys wrestle. But so they had mattresses in the living room, but also Dominic Dunn told me that Allan had hired a hustler for every room in the house so that Nureyev could be serviced on the spot because he was sexually insatiable, but he never got around to using any of those guys, although other people did, you know, because he had already set up camp in, you know, the
and
little
his dance
stone
card
college.
was full.
In the Stone Cottage.
So then it goes without saying that Allan Carr was a gay man, openly so at a time when it was not as accepted, and very flamboyant.
It's intriguing about the 70s, and I think for gay people it's a misunderstood decade because you think, oh, there was Harvey Milk. Well, who was Harvey Milk? Harvey Milk was not a major politician. But someone like Allan Carr, who was, you know, this producer of Grease and, you know, this major manager, he was completely out there. And other people, you know, the David Geffens of the world or whatever, and certainly were not out, and, you know, some of these people still aren't. But Allan pulled that off because he was this anti-main character. Yeah. You know, he was the court jester.
And in a way, he had no choice.
Caftans and
you have a wonderful picture of him which I'm showing now, of him as a child, that he was always this obese, very open to himself gay boy, and really had no choice but to be that person.
Well, I think it's interesting with gay people, that photograph of him where he has his Cub Scout cap on. You can tell his parents were like, join Cub Scouts and we'll make a man out of you. But he's striking a showgirl pose because that's what he wants. Yeah. If you look at photographs of him in high school, he's the nerd. He's very kind of withdrawn. So you can see at some point, even though someone had to take that photograph and keep it, probably a parent or someone said, you know, this just isn't acceptable. And you can see this inwardness. It's great doing a biography and how much you learn from photographs, if you see a lot of them. But in college, he was called Poopsie, and he had his own column. He was the theater critic.
Yes, at Lake Forest College, which was not very, very liberal.
Yeah. So, you know, he was already then really overweight and starting to wear caftans in his senior year, but no one called him gay, or certainly they wouldn't have used that, but they didn't call him a fairy or queer or any of those things because he was just so outrageous. So
much of your book is fueled because it was a time that it was before AIDS. Yeah. And it was before people really understood the harm of cocaine. That it was, you know, so and a lot of this story, isn't it, is fueled by the insatiable sex, the insatiable drugs. I mean, that led to his fall from power.
Well, what happened, and we're kind of jumping ahead to the Oscar disaster, but I think one of the reasons that Hollywood turned on him so fast is he used to have these little cameras in his disco, and I don't know. If you're in that disco, I looked up and I said, and the tables spun around, so obviously they were designed to do lines of coke. And I look up and I go, there's a camera up there. You know, so what these people, you know, and that fed into his TV set in his master bedroom. So people in Hollywood would, you know, have all this sex and drugs, and he would have these, you know, private orgies kind of at 4 o'clock in the morning. I got a hold of the DJ who would spin records for the major parties and also the orgies. And, you know, at 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, there would be Allan in one corner and Merv Griffin in another and Roy Cohn in another, and I can't tell you the politician who
make
was
sure
in
they're
the
all dead
one.
that you're telling us. All these people are dead.
The living politician.
The top politician was in the fourth one. Okay. But so these people were kind of afraid of Allan also, because there he had tapes of them having sex and doing cocaine, and you're just like, these people must have been just completely whacked out that you would be doing this on camera, because I walked into the disco and went, oh, camera.
There. Bob, let me ask you, Allan Carr's kind of been, forgotten really for a long time. What got you thinking about doing a book on him, bringing him back to life, really?
Well, I'd done this crazy book, The Man Who Invented Rock Hudson, which was about this gay agent, Henry Wilson, who lived out his sexual fantasy of creating Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, Troy Donahue, Chad Everett. And around that time, I saw Tim Burton's movie, Ed Wood. And I actually kind of used Ed Wood as a template or inspiration that you can do a story about a real person whose life is so weird that if you wrote it as a novel, no one would accept it. Right. But you go, this happened. And Ed Wood, of course, is this guy who was straight, who was a transvestite, who did the worst movies in the world. And I was kind of looking with Henry Wilson. It really took us through the 30s, through the 60s, and what it was to be gay in Hollywood. So I was looking for something about the 70s. And the guys who wrote the screenplay to Ed Wood had also written a screenplay of The Village People. And that never got made. And I thought, oh, I'll do The Village People. It'll start in 77, but it's basically over with Can't Stop the Music in 1980, which ended their career. And then
which Allan Carr produced.
Which Allan Carr produced. And so I thought, oh, Allan, and I love that Party Animals of the 70s, and then I also love that in the 80s he had La Cage aux Folles, which was the first, big, gay musical that had same-sex lovers in it, which played out against the AIDS crisis and was eventually closed prematurely, although it ran for 4 years because of the AIDS crisis.
Why do you think it closed because of the AIDS crisis?
Well, what happened was Rock Hudson died in October 1985, and I believe it was a Wednesday morning, and CBS or ABC had a camera crew in front of the Palace Theater. These people walking out of having seen this frothy Broadway musical and said, how do you feel about, Rock Hudson, a homosexual dying of AIDS, and you just saw a gay play?
And this was at a time when people thought, you could get AIDS just by breathing the same air as a gay man.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the box office went down, and then 2 years
because
later.
I thought your point was going to be that a significant number of the members of the cast of La Cage aux Folles died of AIDS, which was also the truth, that their dancers were
Fritz
kind
Holt
yeah.
died,
and
who was the
Fritz Holt,
executive producer, and there was one of the Cagels who died very early in it. But it's intriguing about that because in 1983, when the show opened, and I might be wrong about this, and it's just my interpretation, and I didn't go into it, but I didn't feel that the show was really embraced by the gay community, that I kept hearing about gay people going to see it and going like, oh, it's old Uncle Bruce, because it wasn't based on the movie. In fact, that's a whole other controversy, that they ran into trouble, that Mike Nichols, who was fired as the original director of the show, bought the rights to the movie, and Allan had only bought the rights to the play.
Right.
So that created real complications. But I don't remember even in '83. But I guess to the general Broadway going world, AIDS in 1983 still wasn't that big.
It hadn't registered.
Let's swing it back to Allan Carr. What was his childhood like? What got him going into show business?
He came from a well-to-do family. I should say a well-to-do mother and father who were merchants in Chicago, and he lived in Highland Park, and his backyard was Lake Michigan. I mean, he came from money. Mm-hmm. And they used to take him to Broadway almost every other week. His mother would, because his mother and father were divorced. So he really knew show business. And coming from Chicago, he loved Mike Todd, and remember, Around the World in 80 Days, I think had its premiere in 55 or 56. And there was a big Madison Square party for that. Where Mike Todd was the ringleader, and it was televised. And so that's the kind of party that Allan wanted to give for Can't Stop the Music, which was on the plaza of Lincoln Center. And it was kind of a circus theme, and he was the ringmaster. And so that's what he was trying to replicate. His parents had enough money to start up or restart the Chicago Civic Theater, and he did give a season of plays, Betty Davis and Gary Merrill, came in the world of Carl Sandburg, and Eva Le Gallienne came in something. And this was funded by his parents, and he was just out of college.
So he really was a born producer, presenter,
He was a born, and
promoter.
then he immediately started doing talent, and he would have been 21 years old for Hugh Hefner's TV show, the first TV show, which really kind of spawned the Playboy clubs.
Yeah.
So here was this gay guy, and I talked to Hugh Hefner about that, and he says, well, he, got the talent and whatever, and they were, big, Hefner was definitely into, big jazz names. So, they were sizable names, and then he was, this fairly successful producer not producer, but manager in the 60s, which I don't go into much, because I really was interested, of course, in the lurid aspect, so.
Well, let me ask you, was that hedonism, though, always there in him? Was he always with the drugs and the hustlers, or did that come along the more successful he got?
Well, according to David Geffen and a number of other people, they thought he was a virgin throughout the 60s.
Really?
And then he was morbidly obese, and they think that in the 70s, he had one of the first bypass operations. And this is typical of Allan. Body by Dr. Rex whatever at a party. And he bragged about it, and he knew that the press would love him. I mean, he knew the quotes to feed to the press. And so he really worked that. So he was just very, very high profile.
But you were saying you thought that how did the bypass then sort of play in
Well,
this?
he lost weight. I think he was embarrassed to have sex. And some people thought that it was really kind of in 73, 74 that he lost his virginity or really started having a lot of sex. And also by then he had money. And so if
and
he
a coke habit, right?
Yeah, and a coke habit. So if he felt that he wasn't attractive, he used to just walk up to guys, particularly when he made money on Grease, and it was cash or career.
Right.
That was his come on line.
Really?
Cash
That's
or
what he would say to
career.
cute boys, cash or career? Huh. Can you name any of the boys who opted for the career?
I'm sure there are lots. I'd also heard that he was a voyeur. That was it.
Well,
that he really liked to watch.
He had the
liked
cameras
to
in
watch
the disco.
cameras, and he also liked to watch young men wrestle, and sometimes he would join them and whatever.
So his eye for talent, though, at that time, speaking of the young boys, was amazing.
John Travolta.
And one of his first clients was Anne Margaret, and he had this amazing eye for sort of cheesy, tacky talent, which he was able to promote into becoming wonderful and mainstream, like
John Travolta.
John
right?
Travolta, not to cast aspersions at the present John Travolta, but John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John in Grease was marvelously tacky.
He had to fight for Olivia Newton-John too. Paramount
Really?
did not want her, and so that was. And also, he was very canny in that somehow, with the people who controlled Grease, he got them to sign the interpolation clause. So that's why you have all these songs written by Barry Gibb and John Farrar and
Louis
The best
St. Louis
songs.
and
and Louis
Scott
St.
Simon.
Louis and whatever, which are now part of the stage show.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it is kind of amazing with that. And, to his credit, I mean, the original La Cage aux Folles, the team was going to be Maura Yeston, J. Preston Allen. She wrote the book called The Queen and I, which turned into The Queen of Basin Street. And Mike Nichols and Tommy Tune was going to choreograph it. And then that fell apart because it was too expensive a package. And then he did put together the team with Fritz Holt and Barry Brown, I think, really put
He brought
together
in
the
Jerry
team.
Herman and
Yeah.
Arthur
So,
Lawrence and Harvey Firestein, who then
Yeah,
wrote the
so-
La Cage that we know. Just going back to Grease, though, I mean, that was the thing that sent him into the stratosphere. How did he get that movie? How did he get those rights? What was his idea for that?
It was Marvin Hamlish had told him, who was his client at the time, who had a chorus line then, and said, you've got to see Grease, it can be a movie. And he went to check into the rights, and Ralph Bakshi, who had done Fritz the Cat, wanted to turn it into an animated feature. And then those rights lapped, and it was years. No one else had picked up Grease, and Allan was really the one who saw that through. And he also, frankly, took Grease. Pat Birch, who choreographed it, talked about this, that, they lost the Chicago asphalt, and, all of a sudden it's palm trees.
Yeah, it was a little musical out of Chicago in the first place.
So this was, Allan knew what middle America wanted, with that. And he wanted Olivia Newton-John, but they had to change it from Sandy Dombrowski to Sandy Olsen, which is
From Australia.
which is Anne Margaret Olsen. That's
Yes,
where that
right.
name came
And he also wouldn't let the original creators on the set.
No, he would not.
Now we
gotta go to the Oscars.
We got to touch on the Oscars
we gotta do the Oscars.
because all right, here he comes. He's rolling from Grease, right? La Cage aux Folles, a big hit in New York, and he gets a chance, a dream for him to be the producer of the Oscars, 89 Oscars. Catastrophe. What was the idea? What went wrong? And what happened to him afterward?
Well, this is my interpretation that I think Hollywood was gunning for him because, number one, some people were a little bit afraid of him because of these tapes that he had, and he had too many stories to tell. Also, he was always the flamboyant Allan Carr. Even though he was openly gay, the press did not write about that. Even Vito Russo, who wrote Celluloid Closet, in a profile with The Advocate in 1980, does not identify Allan Carr as being gay. I mean, that gives you an idea. And he brought on Bruce Valanche, openly gay writer from the moment he stepped into the Hollywood Hills.
Right.
And he was going to write the whole show. And ABC got very nervous in the last week and brought on Hildy Parks, who of course written the Tony shows, to do this. And then also his other big hire at the beginning was that he was bringing Steve Silver, who directed Beach Bank at Babylon, which is still running in San Francisco, down to direct that notorious opening number with Snow White. Right. Okay, so you've got San Francisco, flamboyant, openly gay.
He was queening up the Oscars in a way, was he not?
Yeah. It's an opening number where Snow White walks into the auditorium.
It's greeted by Army
women, this unknown actress, dressed up as Snow White, and she goes, "How do I, get to the Oscars?" And Army Archer said, "Follow the stars." And then she comes in and starts shaking the hands of Tom Hanks and Glenn Close and Michelle Pfeiffer, who are looking at this life-size cartoon character, completely aghast. Then she goes up on stage, and it's the Copacabana, not the Copacabana, the Coconut Grove, and Merv Griffin is singing "What a Lovely Bunch of Coconuts."
I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts.
Right. Which he used to sing in the 40s, but the TV audience doesn't know that. It's just old pudgy Merv Griffin. And then there's all of these waxworks of like Dale Evans and Roy Rogers and Vincent Price sitting around who can't really walk very well. And then it goes into a chorus line thing that's kind of out of Carmen Miranda.
And Rob Lowe is Prince Charming.
And Rob Lowe, I forgot that, is Prince Charming, and he can't sing. And he's singing to Snow White, and, Snow White has this squeaky voice. And then it goes into a replica of Grauman's Chinese Theater, and Lily Tomlin walks out and says, "Welcome to the Oscars." That kind of campiness we deal with better today. But back then, this was before the really success of people who deal in irony, that kind of irony like Tim Burton. And I actually think that if Snow White would have been Bette Midler, everyone would have gone, "Oh, this is a gag, and this is supposed to be funny, and whatever."
Well, he tried to get people like on the level.
Well, he tried to get Bette Midler to be at the very end. Yeah, but Lorna Luft knew better than to go into this world. You have to also remember it's TV, and the thing was 12 minutes long. The one thing that they learned about it, and Hollywood was so aghast about it that people like Blake Edwards, Julie Andrews, Paul Newman, Gregory Peck wrote a letter, like in essence, banning Allan Carr from ever doing the Oscars again. And also then Disney sued for copyright infringement on Snow White.
Yes, because it's wonderful they forgot to ask Disney if it was okay to use Snow White.
Well, there's controversy about what Disney knew.
Oh,
so
interesting.
there's kind of, and also these were open rehearsals.
Yeah.
And there were photographs taken by AP and the LA Times. So if you ever see anything of that can be reprinted, these were photographs that were taken in rehearsal.
So it wasn't a big secret.
But what's so interesting is that Bruce Valanche, who we love beyond all measure here at Theater Talk, has gone on to write many wonderful Oscar programs.
And the whole show, Steve Silver just directed the opening 12 minutes, and at one point he was saying, "This is 12 minutes, it's way too long," and Allan said, "Step aside, you've already got a job in San Francisco. This is my next job." Allan thought that he was going to produce the Oscars forever. And so that we have the 10 minutes for this, Allan Carr started the whole red carpet mania that we have today. And Allan said, "Hey, let's do 5 or 10 minutes of red carpet coverage." Now the red carpet coverage
longer than the Oscars
for
themselves.
the Grammys, the Emmys,
Yes,
the Golden Globes
innovative.
has taken over. This is $1 billion a year business. And Allan hired Fred Heyman from Rodeo Drive, very famous realtor, to get designers to lend their designs, Halston and Giorgio Santangelo, to the actresses, and they were very reluctant to do it. So all of that fashion, Oscar, award stuff started with Allan Carr. He is the one, and this is on the Tonys. The Tony goes to. It used to be, and the winner goes to. Allan said, "No, it's going to be, and the Oscar goes to." And he really upped it. And the ratings went through the roof that year. They had been on a 5-year decline. But what happened is the next day Disney sued. There was this petition of 17 people from Paul Newman to Fred Zinnemann, essentially banning, Allan Carr from the Oscars. The Oscars then had a commission to see what went wrong. And one of the big things they decided is that an opening number should only be 3 minutes. In fact, any number should only be 3 minutes.
Well, I think that's a good ruling.
Yeah. But this was the end for Allan Carr. I mean, he lived another 10 years or so, but there was no career after this Oscar fiasco.
His health was never good, but I think he ran on cocaine and adrenaline, and he was just this bundle of energy, always, always. And he became a recluse for 2 years, and he did not show his face at a Hollywood function until Angie Dickinson appeared on the AFI tribute to, I think, Kirk Douglas, and said, "You're going to be my date." "No, I don't want to go." And she says, "Yes, you are." And that introduced him to Hollywood again. But what was really sad is that Allan showed up at Morton's restaurant the next day, and no one in the restaurant would speak to him.
The day after the Oscars? Yes. Really? Just, I mean, what a brutal town.
No,
One
really
day he's on top, and the next day, that's it, over, finished.
Mm-hmm.
Sad. Well, listen, the book is terrific. I mean, it's a great story of a man's life, but also a wonderful slice of Hollywood and the hedonistic days. Party Animals, a Hollywood tale of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, starring the fabulous Allan Carr.
You'll wish you were there.
Dancing for Allan Carr's cameras. By Bob Hofler from Variety. Thanks a lot for being our guest.
Good
to see you.
Thanks, Bob.
You can sign up for viewer updates at theatertalk.org.
Or you can Twitter us.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.